Hello and welcome to another episode of Jacket Tie and FlipFlops, a light-hearted and casual podcast on work, life, and more. Every episode, we hope to feature a leader who has embraced change, hurdled over obstacles, and inspired teams and people around them. I have to admit, our guest list is becoming very interesting, and today is no different. Sam Pattison, apart from being a respected leader in our business, is also someone I am lucky to work alongside, which gives me a ringside view of him weaving his magic, bringing teams together, pursuing a common goal. Apart from being a people's person and dad to an adorable baby girl, he's also an avid pet lover and knows his wines and beers. If you ever need a recommendation for a good spot to have a meal, he's your guy. More about Sam from the man himself. Thanks for being on the show, Sam. Floor's yours.
Thanks very much, Jules. That was a hell of an intro. Really appreciate it, and thanks for having me. So I'll go back kind of, I guess, all the way back to my first kind of proper job, really, which was actually at a jeweler's. Not a lot of people would know this because it was quite a long time ago. But as a 15-year-old, I spent my Thursday evenings and Sunday daytimes being, truth be told, very unsuccessful at trying to sell overpriced gold to punters.
That's interesting.
My biggest and most successful sale was a £1,000 engagement ring, which for this store was kind of up there in terms of price range, wow. Which was unfortunately returned a week later after the recipient said no to the gentleman in question. So I didn't last much longer there, it would be fair to say. Kind of following that, I had stints at a sports store. I worked in a bar for over a year, kind of towards the end of and a year after my time at Manchester University. And then did kind of bits and pieces of work at a communications agency, a recruitment advertiser, until really I started to think more seriously about a career. So I was kind of around 22, I guess, at the time. Mm-hmm. A few close friends of mine who were kind of a year ahead of me at school had entered the world of advertising, and really couldn't stop telling me about all of the free lunch and drinks that they were being treated to by vendors, which was certainly at the time one of the big parts of what the industry was in London and in many other cities, I'm sure. Right. That really kind of pricked my ears up. Like my father was from this industry actually, but I hadn't really had any inclination to move into advertising per se. Like, as much as he did it, we didn't really ever talk about it too much. It wasn't a big focus at home. So I'd done kind of my work experience at a radio station, and so music was kind of maybe something that I had the biggest passion for at the time, kind of alongside sport. But free pints and steak was all I needed to hear, really. So it was after actually took a while, but managed to get a role at what's now called Dentsu. Previously was Aegis in London, and this is where I spent my first kind of 6 or 7 years. Firstly as a planner buyer, and later moving into the investment arm of the business. So looking after trading, firstly for UK business, and then later into partnerships that covered global business. It was this that actually kind of brought me to Singapore, which is obviously where we met. But I was running a global partnership program for Microsoft. We did a kickoff session in Singapore, where I met my future boss. He had a role that synced very well with my skill set, and I at the time had been kind of really thinking about moving abroad to do something a bit different. Spent a few years in Singapore with Dentsu, leading strategic partnerships, so kind of working with the Facebooks, Googles, trying to build products, systems, and sync up what we were doing with them a bit better. But actually, it was kind of a weird serendipitous moment where the thing that brought me to Singapore, which was this global partnership program, which was actually with our company now, Teeds, it was their first global partnership. They obviously didn't tell me that at the time. They told me that they do this all the time, and it wasn't in the pitch deck. Because I knew people from that business, kind of brought me over to to Teeds, and so that was kind of just over 6 years ago now. Originally starting in strategic accounts, so what I would call kind of sales light, where you're not actually signing business, you're kind of building more strategic approaches to how to work better with clients. So was really kind of leading that team for a while, took on the whole sales org for Southeast Asia, and then took the role that I'm currently in as MD about 3 years ago, which was really, I'd say, for at least 5, 6, 7 years had been kind of my goal. So running a P&L, being a key decision maker for a business, and for one that I believed in. So all of those things kind of came together quite nicely, and that's really been, well, that and the beautiful child that came into my life about 15 months ago have been keeping me busy ever since.
Nice. Teets is definitely lucky to have you, Sam, but that's something you already know. But given your rich experience across roles, companies, and geographies, if I could ask you, what do you enjoy most about your role? And where does the sense of fulfillment come in from?
So it's a great question, because it's something that I think you ask yourself more and more as you grow, and with experience, and it's principally because you've been doing, I've been doing at least principally the same thing in the same industry for so long, and so you really need to find, like, what is the thing that gives you purpose in the workplace. Like, we've all had tough times, especially, we've all really experienced the impact of the pandemic and kind of what that's meant to us as people, how we work, where we work. And I would say in the last kind of 3 to 4 years, especially as you become kind of more of a leader in the workplace, you need to understand, like, what is the thing that drives you. So many people in media sales are driven by money, which is obviously absolutely fine. It's so if you're a salesperson that doesn't care about money, you're probably in the wrong job, right? But when times are hard, you feel down, a good quarter can make you feel a lot better about what you're doing, even if you're kind of questioning, and you should always be questioning, like, what you're doing. Is it the right thing for you at that time, for your family, all those kind of things. But for me, like, money's never really been the driving force. Like, it's obviously nice, and it gives you a bit more flexibility, and you can kind of live in a nice home, and you can give nice things to your family and your friends, etc. But it's not what governs my decision-making processes. Like, I've never really been driven by that solely. Like, whenever I talk to candidates, I always stress my favorite KPI, which is a really very dull one on paper, but is super important to me, and that's voluntary churn. So for anyone not familiar, it's essentially how many people choose to leave your business over a year period. So, like, I've been in Teeds for 6.5 years. Feels like quite a long time, but there are actually a fair few people that have been in longer than I have. And we've really had a spine of people for so many years. And over the last 2 years, an overall churn rate of less than 5%. So
it's impressive.
To give, again, for anyone who's not familiar, if you have a business and a churn rate of like less than 20%, like, that's generally considered good. And this obviously varies by industry, and even between agency to media sales, etc. But so it's something that I'm extremely happy with, very proud of, and obviously there's lots of reasons for that. It's certainly not just about me, but it's something that I certainly wear very, very proudly. And I would say all the leaders have been very very keen to keep people and to help them in their journey. But yeah, so that's really one of the key things. Like, it's obviously my duty to deliver our business KPIs, but it's my passion to do it in the right way. So being transparent, being collaborative, and being, like, most of all fair in processes where you can be. So my favorite day of the month at work, at least, is our all hands. And the best thing about it is nothing in the session is mandated. No one is, like, forced to do things. It's totally open for anyone to add to it, shout out their colleagues. Like, my work is not my life. I don't expect anyone else for it to be their life, but for them to actually go out of their way, share great work, highlight a teammate is really what fulfills me. And that's kind of all I need to keep going and keep justifying why you kind of put up with the tough times and keep kind of coming back to the well.
I agree. I mean, in most of the conversations that we had, they cannot be a greater joy as a leader when you see your people succeed, either internally or externally. There was one leader who spoke to me, and he left me with this line. He says, when birds get wings, they have to fly. And, in your capacity of wearing multiple hats, leading teams, there's this age-old debate that's going on, Sam, which is, are leaders and managers born or made? I think that there's lots of people who are responsible for this. But in your opinion, what role should organizations play in grooming excellence?
So I guess the first question on leaders and managers being born or made, I think there's a clear distinction, because I mean, managers, of course, can be made because there are so many managers. Like if you think through any organization, like throughout from top all the way through to middle, and sometimes depending on the size of the business, the bottom, there are managers of, even if it's one person or 10 people or 100 people for that matter. I think you can be made to be a competent manager. Mm-hmm. There's obviously lots of courses you can go on. There are processes that are laid out, and any business that is kind of doing it well should be leading new managers on that process. It doesn't often happen, actually, in my experience, trying to think if I ever had a management course. I'm not sure I really did, but that can be done. But I'd say leaders for me is a little bit different, because the qualities are quite intangible. It's certainly not a one size fits all. So speaking from my perspective, like growing up, you don't have a huge amount of opportunity to lead per se. For me, it was in sports. So captaining sports teams from early on gave me that opportunity to kind of have reliance from like teachers or sports staff to just give you just a little bit of that leadership, whether it's like tossing the coin at the start of the game or setting the field for cricket or whatever that may be. Speaking to the team when they're down in the dumps and you're behind. So I'm also a bit of a control freak, to be fair. So you combine those two things, and that probably led me to where I am today. But I mean, we've all seen that leaders in business quite often are people that haven't played sports, right? They're maybe people that have grown as leaders later on. Mm-hmm. They've maybe been extremely smart people, but not necessarily people-centric people as younger, when they were younger. And these are different types of leaders that can lead by example, right? So you kind of either have those, one of those two, like a leader who's someone that you kind of look up to based on how they carry themselves or what they do on a day-to-day basis. And there are others that are much more like, okay, that's the smartest person I've ever met, and I want to be behind that person, working with them. So to be clear, leaders aren't always great managers, and that's a clear distinction, I would say. Is like a leader quite often is someone that can maybe garner some sort of respect because of the things I mentioned, but not necessarily going to be able to impart that knowledge onto others as well. So one thing I would say is that I've learned something from every single leader I've ever been around, even the bad ones. Like, we're all learning all the time. And so if I find myself displaying negative traits that I've seen in others, like, I'll obviously do my best to check myself, and also hope that people around me will pull me up on them as well. And that's another thing that you as a leader need to generate, is an environment where you can be questioned and you want to be questioned and asked, is that the right way to do things? So but one of the hardest things about leadership is remaining grounded and humble. Like when you're in any position of power, so you're treated differently. Like, just to be very clear, what I experience is a very, very tiny taste of something that's important, right? So a prime minister, a president, like someone that's actually doing something that is delivering a lot more than kind of advertising is for us. But people that aren't necessarily a leader from day one, of course they can become that. Like I think that people don't fundamentally change, but they can adapt, right? And that's something that I would always buy into. But yeah, leaders are typically there from day one, I would say.
I agree with you, and some of the other guests that I spoke to came up with this interesting facet on leadership itself, and they compared it to right parenting. Right? There's this concept of mirroring your parents, and subconsciously you're getting some traits and picking up some real good qualities. So leaders can be your parents at office in terms of where you're actually these future corporate citizens, like I call them, are mirroring some of these traits and aspire in some little way to take this to their next roles. And everyone aspires and ambitious, right? And taking a note from what you said earlier, and everyone who knows you close enough will know that how big you are on this particular subject of building culture, right? So they say organizations without the right culture are like bodies without a soul. And now, knowing how big you are on building culture-first organizations, what do you think are some of the challenges that you faced? Is there a playbook to find the right answer, Sam?
I mean, the simple answer is absolutely not. No, there isn't. I think the biggest challenge, if I were to be brought into an organization and told, right, we want you to change the culture, I can't do that on my own. Like it's so much of a collaborative thing. I really can't stress that enough. It's and it makes it so much easier. We speaking from experience are very fortunate to have a group of leaders. I talk about this all the time. Group of leaders in our business who are fundamentally good people. They are people that will go out of their way for the betterment of the culture of the business. And if you try and hammer these things over people's heads and they are not perceptive, fundamentally, you're not going to win, right? It's not going to go in the right direction. So like as a leader, you tend to hire people like you, right? So the good thing for us is by having fundamentally good people in leadership positions, we tend to hire quite well, and the general spirit of like positive people that pull in the same direction. But that's just at the leadership level, right? Once you have these in this kind of mid-level or junior, like these are the fuel that makes everything go. So as much as you can enable positivity and enable culture at the top by saying yes to events and making money available for team building and really kind of allow an environment that people can speak up, they can be themselves, they can have fun at work. But the key thing is you cannot force it. It's not something that you can walk in and say, right, we're going to have good culture. Like it takes such time. It needs a concerted effort, but not by one person. Like what I try and do, and I'd say I'm very lucky to have in my arsenal is kind of empathy. Like it's a huge guide for me. And so it's really helped me in my journey, like having the ability and more importantly, wanting to empathize with everyone in a certain situation. And what that gives you is the ability to make informed long-term decisions and to build trust. I will always think back to my first year in Dentsu in London as to like, if this decision was made, how would I think about it? But who I was, 15, 16 years ago is not who young people are now. Like it's talked ad nauseum about, right? The Gen Z and how they're different to the generations before. And this is inevitable. It happens, but it does become difficult. But fundamentally, everyone wants the same things, right? They want to be paid well. They want to be secure in their job. They want to work with people they generally like. And the biggest kind of newer one, I guess, is flexibility. And I don't think we need to spend time devoted on flexible working and whether it's good or bad, but it's a dilemma. Like, it's difficult because you need to have that flexibility, but how flexible can you be before you've gone too far? Create an environment that takes for granted, an environment that is positive and allows you to do these things. It's you always kind of want and need everyone to want to care and to want to go above and beyond, but it's not realistic to expect that of everyone in a decent sized organization. So there are some simple things you can do to set the tone of what I would say positive culture, but that's really all you can do. So key things are to like challenge like norms, or the all hands is a good example. And I'm so glad that we did start to do that. But you can't just like put that in place and think that it's going to change things. Like you need to change the way that people think, like the rhythm of these things. Like we've tried doing them on a Thursday morning, a Wednesday afternoon, a Friday afternoon, like add time after for us to hang out. Like you've got to try different things because people get used to these kind of these norms and they start to take them for granted. So yeah, these are kind of some key things I think that I've kind of picked up over time, and will always try and remind myself to keep up as much as possible.
So thanks for that, Sam. Knowing that you're one of those leaders who's so highly invested in building culture first, morale. What could be really, really frustrating today is the high attrition rates, low loyalty. These things have been the bane to most new age industries. Right? In a world where loyalty is at an all-time low, how do we groom integrity? Or is it something that we just continue to go with the flow and take for granted?
So I'd say this is probably the biggest thing for me and has really been my North Star throughout my career. And I cannot, if you're a kind of a younger person, which I know is a big part of why this podcast exists, is like just really think about how you are coming across and how your integrity is measured by other people. Like I've worked with so many people over the years. I'm sure you have as well, Jules, between the UK and Asia and far beyond that as well. But you find over time, over and over again, just how small the industry really is. And every time I'm interviewing a candidate, I'll check LinkedIn. There'll always be a minimum of, 20, 30, 40 mutual connections. Whilst I'm obviously not close to all of those people, like I will probably be with at least one or two, I will shoot them a message, check, see if they have an opinion on that person. Now, you obviously need to take some of these things with a pinch of salt because maybe this person hasn't worked with that other person for 10 years. But if 10 years ago you did something that really irked that person, they will remember it. Like they will always remember it. And I guarantee you, it will cost you opportunities later down the line. And that's something that, like, don't get me wrong, I've made plenty of errors in my career. And I really wish I'd done many things differently. But I've always tried my best to act with integrity. And like I'm saying this, like you should always try to act with integrity. Like hopefully you do that as a human being. But I would just say in the workplace, it's something that you sometimes need to even just consciously think about in certain situations is, what does this mean for obviously everyone around me, but what is it going to mean for me kind of moving forward? And that's very, very hard to do at times because we've all been in like heated meeting rooms, or you've had issues with the client or whatever it may be. But it's something you really, really do need to think about, especially as you start to climb the ladder. Early on, I think you can get away with it a little bit. But once you get to that kind of mid-level and management and there's a bit more responsibility, then it's super tough. But this, I think you mentioned it a little bit earlier, this is something that's ingrained before you walk into your first job. Like generally you've been molded by your parents, by your schooling, university, whatever that may be. but it can be very, very quickly broken or made by your first manager.
It's true, so true.
Like, your first manager is the most important person in your development, because what you learn is right and wrong and how you should behave is from that manager. But like we generally know how to behave as people, and there are obviously exceptions, but once you step into a new environment, you kind of like, it's a bit of a blank slate. I was very, very fortunate to have an incredible first manager, and by and large, great managers throughout my career who taught me to navigate what can be a tough ecosystem as a 22-year-old who doesn't really have a lot of money. Like, I was living in just outside London and spending most of my money on my rent and what's left on food and transport, essentially. And don't get me wrong, like it was okay, but like all of a sudden you're eating in very nice restaurants and you don't have to pick up the bill. So yeah, like the integrity ingrained in me by my parents was doubled down on by that manager. And I've always tried to act that way, especially if I'm thinking about people that are like taking you out and all the rest of it, and as if the shoe were on the other foot. But I guess back to your question of like whether it can be taken for granted. I mean, I just think too many people place, and I probably place maybe more than some of an emphasis on this, just because it's just so important to me and it can irk me hugely. But I think everyone has value in these things. Like in any industry, you'll come across people with bad behaviors. These are most likely ingrained by bad managers and systems. It doesn't mean they're fundamentally bad people, but they have bad learned behaviors. And as a salesperson, this often manifests in clients being unresponsive, like ungrateful for work you've put in, or just taking for granted kind of the way they've been looked after. And to this day, I struggle to contain my frustration at these sort of behaviors. But I've gotten a lot better at not making these feelings abundantly clear. My face sometimes is a gateway into my soul, and you'll know that, Jules. So when you sometimes avoid me on a Monday morning, I know exactly why. It's a common thing, but I've got a lot better, especially when it comes to clients, like handling these things in a better way. And actually, one tip that I was taught by sort of my second manager was, if you've ever had like a really difficult email from a client, or they're behaving in a way that you're sort of like, this just doesn't make sense, like write the email, delete the email, and then write it again. And I promise you, the tone is just a little bit softer, a little less passive aggressive, and all round will be a better decision, because it is never, ever, ever a good thing to make a client feel like stupid or like you're telling them how to do their job. Even if they're doing their job extremely badly, it's never your responsibility to do that. I will caveat by saying, like, challenging clients is never a bad thing. Like, demonstrating that you know what you're talking about, you can offer value in a situation. Questioning is not necessarily an issue, but making them feel stupid is never the way to go. So yeah, that's one little nugget which I still use to this day and will use forever.
I completely agree with you, Sam. I know you promised me 20 minutes of your time. I think we've crossed time, but I'm going to request you to squeeze in one last question on our list. On the subject of loyalty, and this is specifically why when we discuss this podcast, this is for the future corporate citizen, anyone who's entering this workspace. And you mentioned it earlier as well. You see the career span, time spent in each of these companies is becoming smaller. Right? If you look back on your career, mine, and a few of us who've probably spent a few more years in the business, we've spent like 5-6 years, whatever that average. But the overall average is coming down. How important is timing in pursuit of personal career goals?
Well, it's extremely important. So with I've really only worked in 2 businesses for most of my career. Obviously done about 7 different like disciplines within that time, which is, I think, has been why it's kind of worked. But from a timing perspective, something that I remember back to my first decision or tough decision on whether to actually leave Dentsu to join another agency at the time. And I, as I quite often do, is I spoke to my dad to get his kind of point of view, and he's very good at just talking things out, but not telling me things, which is actually quite frustrating sometimes. So, you just want the answer, but he doesn't want to tell you the answer. He wants to help you to kind of get there on your own. And but the biggest advice that I take from him is to go with your gut, and it's always stood me in good stead. Like you know 9 times out of 10 what you should do, I think, and you obviously can't predict the future, but your gut will tell you more than anyone else can ever tell you. So yeah, when I was making that first hard decision whether to go and join another agency at the time, I think I was about 2 years into my career. It was tough because the money was quite a lot better. I think it was the title was a bit nicer, but the role was a lot more narrow. The business was smaller, and I worked with a great team at the time. Like it really was the best years of my life. We spent so much time together, working late, as I said, sort of going out on Thursday and Friday nights and all the rest of it. So it would have got me more money in the short term, but I really genuinely believe it would have stunted my growth in the long term. And that notion of kind of chasing money, which is, again, totally understandable, it will make you happy for the, well, I don't know if I read this or heard this, and I'm not sure if it's true or not, but it sounds about right that money will make you happy for about 3 months. So when you get a pay rise or new job with more money, after that, you get used to the package. All of a sudden, the same issues are still there. Whatever made you unhappy before will make you unhappy again. And the same would be true if you move to a new business. Maybe that 3 months is extended because you're in a new environment and it's a bit more exciting. You're getting to know new people. But like fundamentally, if you don't believe in that business or the role is not what you want to be doing, then it's not going to work for you. And along with that, like if you're moving to maybe a business that doesn't sync with your values or what you're trying to achieve, like whether you like it or not, your work, where you work, becomes part of your identity. Teeds is a company that I believed in. It's one of the reasons why I joined it. But it's amazing how these things can really rub off, even if you only somewhere for a short period of time. But these decisions are super tough to make, and I'm obviously now talking from years of experience and not just starting out and struggling to pay bills and all the rest of it. Sure. So yeah, it's easy for me to maybe say these things, but I would just say, like, always prioritize places that you can grow. And I, as I said before, working with people that you like people say all the time, like, you spend a lot more time with your colleagues than you do with your family, so by and large. Right? So if you don't like these people, then how on earth are you going to be fulfilled in your role? You're not. You're probably going to be one of those people that comes in and clocks in and puts your headphones on. And again, there are many people that do that. And if they want to do that, that's obviously their prerogative. But if you're spending that much of your life in a place, like, try and make the best of it for sure. And in extension of that, like, as I said, I worked in 2 businesses. What it's really allowed me to do is to build a profile. So like, people see that you place value in loyalty. If the company's big enough, and it's not always possible, but they'll show, and you show willing and you show promise, they'll give you options, they'll give you opportunities, so long as you give them time to kind of get you there.
Just have to be patient and wait for that opportunity to hit you.
Exactly.
While giving you 100%, of course. Yeah,
of course. Like, don't expect to snap your fingers and become the CEO. Like, obviously that's not the case. But if you give your manager runway and you say, right, I feel like I've kind of achieved everything I can in this role or in this team. I really am interested in moving into another team or maybe to another market, as I mentioned. Give them 6 months, give them, I don't know, maybe a bit longer. It depends on the business. And a good manager should get you there, like by hook or by crook, so long as you are doing all the things that are expected of you. So that I would say is massive, always has been massive. But on the flip side of that, you do need to know when it's the right time to move. So speaking like from my experience, when I finally left Dentsu after like quite a few years, they when I told them I was leaving, they asked me why, and I obviously gave them some of the reasons as to what I wanted to do, and they found a new challenge for me. And they kind of found a new role in a new part of the business that, I mean, actually kind of ticked all the boxes that I asked for. It was a new experience. I was going to be leading quite a big team of people that had a lot of experience in that kind of sector. Yeah. And for me, that just felt wrong. So as much as you should always be super grateful that they're trying to find a way to keep you, and that it's a positive thing fundamentally, you need to also know that it's if it doesn't sync right or isn't something you thought about before, then it's probably not the best solution for you. And so yeah, but all those things, as I said, are always going to be kind of a little bit based on your gut. Leaving a business is terrifying, and I think doesn't matter where you're going, what you're doing, especially when you're a bit younger. But you've got to be brave. You've got to kind of put yourself out there if you're really going to progress. And the final thing I think on this is, I've always, like, people have asked me, oh, you've worked in two businesses for so long, like, would you have done things differently? And for me, absolutely not. For me, this was the right way to do things. And I've got to where I wanted to be, really. There's no doubt about that. Of course, there's new goals. There always should be new goals. But this was really the focus for a long time. So, and this all comes back to doing things the right way, which, as I said, is really core to my belief system and how I want to work. And I'd say, yeah, to anyone who's starting out, like, work out what that thing is that you're always going to come back to, and it should be your kind of guiding star as your career develops.
And always go with the gut.
That's it. Always go with the gut.
Thank you. Sound advice. On that note, thank you once again for your time, Sam. Here's wishing you all the best in everything you do. May you continue to be the agent of change that you are and keep weaving that magic wand. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Jacket Tie and FlipFlops, the podcast that helps you share, learn, and grow. If you have any questions you want to ask our next guest to answer, or you have someone who you want to suggest as our next guest, please write into jacketttieflipflops@gmail.com. Thanks once again, Sam.
Thanks, Jules.
See you guys soon. Bye.